Hey guys, tonight we're not chasing answers. We're falling backward into the quiet. You're lying there again, eyes wide in the dark, not from fear, not from a nightmare, but from something harder to explain. You're awake, you've had that moment, that rupture, that unraveling, where the world seemed to split open, and for a flicker of a second, you saw it. The illusion, the scaffolding, the game. And now you're still here. But it doesn't feel like here anymore. The walls are the same, the people say the same words, but something isn't connecting. And here's the twist no one prepares you for. You woke up, but nothing makes sense anymore. There's no music playing in your chest. The rhythm that once dragged you out of bed, made you strive, hustle, perform, it's gone quiet. You stare at your calendar and wonder who designed this life. The fire you once clung to has vanished. You're not broken, just empty. Like a cup that used to be filled with noise and name tags and goals and good advice, but now it's just still, not hollow, still. And that, right there, is where most people start to panic. You probably won't survive this if you expect the awakening to feel like a TED Talk. It doesn't come with clarity, it doesn't hand you a mission statement, and it sure as hell doesn't give you instant joy. No. It hands you a strange, sacred confusion, a blankness that has the audacity to feel peaceful. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, what time is it where you are, and where are you listening from? Allow the noise to fade, the stillness to bloom, and together we'll begin. You see, real awakening doesn't crown you with confidence. It strips you. It burns off the costume you've spent years sewing. It asks you who you are without applause. And when you realize you don't know, when all the answers you've memorized crumble like wet paper, that's when it begins. Not the enlightenment, but the unraveling. You feel like a stranger in your own home, in your own skin, because you are. You've stepped out of the persona and haven't yet met the self. And between those two is a vast and echoing hallway. This hallway is where the transformation brews, not with a bang, but with silence. A silence that feels like someone turned the lights off in your chest. You're not sad, not really. You're not motivated either. You're not inspired. You're not even curious. You're just here, existing like a question mark nobody's brave enough to read aloud. And while others may call it apathy or laziness or burnout, what you're actually feeling is the first sacred pause of your soul learning how to speak. Not in checklists, not in urgent texts, but in stillness. And that stillness, it's not failure, it's not regression. It's the sacred soil where your new self is just beginning to take root. But because you can't see that root system yet, because the growth is underground and wordless, it feels like you've disappeared. And maybe you have, but not in the way you fear. You haven't died, you're being rewritten. You haven't lost the spark, you're just done burning in the old fire. You haven't lost your way, you've just stepped off the map drawn by a self you no longer are. This is why awakening feels like losing yourself, because you are losing the part of you that was built to survive a world you no longer believe in. You're not who you were. You're not yet who you're becoming. So here you are, in the stillness after the storm, in the haunting calm that follows clarity. No voice is yelling your next step, no neon arrow pointing forward, just the hum of your own breath asking you, can you be here even if you don't know what's next? That's the real test, not how fast you move, but whether you can stay when everything inside you says run, whether you can listen when the world demands noise, whether you can trust the quiet when there's no applause. And you won't get a certificate for this. No medal, no job title. What you get is truth, not flashy, not loud, but yours. So now you're here, sitting in the middle of your own life, like a stranger who just woke up in someone else's dream. There was a time when the sound of your alarm meant something. Deadlines, goals, morning routines, to-do lists, all of it had a flavor, a pulse, a structure that gave you direction. But now, you hear the same alarm, and it echoes in an empty room inside you. Where motivation used to live, there's just quiet. Not despair, not drama, just nothing. And yet the nothing has weight, a presence, a soundless hum that wraps around your day and makes every action feel optional. Every plan feel like it belongs to a version of you that's no longer showing up for the role. You used to be someone with momentum. Now you're someone with space. And that space doesn't offer comfort right away. It offers honesty. Unapologetic, unfiltered honesty. Because when all your striving falls away, when no one's watching, no one's waiting, and you're not even sure who you're performing for anymore, you begin to ask, who was I doing all of this for? You look back and realize that maybe most of your energy was powered by something external. Validation, reward, recognition. Even the spiritual seeking maybe had a hidden motive. To feel enlightened, to seem evolved, to reach that next tier of purpose like a spiritual promotion. But real awakening doesn't feed the ego. It dissolves it. And when it does, the fuel tank empties. The fire that used to burn is gone, and in its place is a soft ash, warm but still. That's the paradox no one warns you about. We're taught that awakening will fill us with purpose, like some divine caffeine shot to the soul. But instead, for many, especially the sensitive ones, the seekers, the quiet observers, it empties the vessel. It scrapes out every leftover performance, every hidden agenda, every should and must and supposed to, until all you're left with is yourself. Not the brand, not the mask, just you. And the silence. This silence, it isn't passive. It's fiercely active. It strips, it exposes, it whispers things you've avoided for years. And most of all, it makes you sit with the question, what if I don't want to be any of the things I was before? What if I'm not here to become something, but to unbecome everything that wasn't mine? That's when the stillness begins to feel sacred, even if it still scares you. Because somewhere deep inside, you know this is not just stillness, it's a sacred disintegration. You are no longer able to perform a life you don't believe in. The rituals, the hustle, the curated image, it doesn't stick anymore. You go through the motions and they fall flat, like trying to wear a costume that itches now, that no longer fits. The quiet at first feels like a threat, but slowly it becomes a teacher. A reminder that motivation driven by fear isn't motivation, it's survival. And survival isn't the same as living. You're not here to chase endless proof that you matter. You're here to listen for what moves you when no one's watching. You're here to ask, what stirs me when applause is no longer required? Jung knew this well. He spoke of the withdrawal of projection, the terrifying beauty of seeing that everything you thought was out there was actually something inside you, waiting to be reclaimed. And when those projections collapse, when the external mirrors break, the soul returns to the self like a tide coming home, and it's quiet. Almost too quiet. But this is where it starts, in the absence of urgency, in the pause between old ambition and new alignment, in the sacred hush where your true motives, uncorrupted by fear, untouched by ego, begin to stretch and yawn and wonder what a life could look like if it was moved by resonance instead of reputation. You're not doing less because you're broken. You're doing less because your soul is finally editing the script. And this time, there's no rush to get it right. So you've arrived at the place no one ever brags about, the hollow hallway where the ego has crumbled, but the self hasn't yet shown its face. This is the spiritual limbo most teachings skip, because it's not glorious, it's not Instagrammable. There's no glow in your skin or thunder in your chest, just a strange stillness that's hard to explain to anyone who hasn't been here. And the more you try to describe it, the more people tilt their heads and suggest vitamins, vacations, or maybe a good podcast on productivity. But this isn't something you can fix. It's not a bug in your system. It is the system being rewritten. You've stepped out of the theater mid-performance. The costume's still on, but you're no longer playing the part. You remember the lines, the cues, the gestures that used to get applause, but when you reach for them now, they don't land. You're not confused. You're disinterested. And that, more than anything, feels alarming. Because it's not that you don't know how to perform, it's that you can't fake it anymore. This is what Jung called the threshold, the space between identities. The sacred terrain where the ego dies not with a scream but with a sigh. It's not a violent collapse, it's a quiet one, a sort of spiritual anemia. And instead of panic, what floods in is stillness. Not peace, not yet, but a kind of eerie neutrality. You don't hate your life, you don't love it either. You're just unhooked. And here's the thing, you haven't failed. You're not lazy, you're not lost. You're in a process that Western culture has no name for. A sacred in-between that our world mislabels as dysfunction. Because it's slow, it's unproductive, it's quiet, and our systems don't know how to value quiet. But Jung did. He knew that this pause wasn't paralysis, it was potential. He called it individuation. The long, strange, necessary process of becoming who you truly are, once all the roles and masks fall away. In this stage, everything feels unfamiliar. Even joy, even rest. You might find yourself lying in bed, not because you're tired, but because movement feels artificial. Like pretending, like effort for effort's sake. You're not depressed, not in the clinical sense. You're in spiritual suspension. The soul has pulled the emergency brake, and the ego hasn't figured out what to do without its old engine. So you sit, or wander, or stare out the window, and the silence grows louder, until you realize it's not silence at all. It's a different kind of language. One that doesn't bark commands or fire off goals. It waits, it watches, it invites, it doesn't rush. But let's be honest, this place can be maddening, especially when the world keeps spinning, shouting, selling purpose like it's a product. People talk about morning routines and manifesting greatness and aligning with your dream life, and you're over here just trying to remember why putting on socks feels like an achievement. This is not because you're weak. It's because the old motivations, approval, status, image, no longer register in your system. They're expired currency. And the new energy? It hasn't been named yet. You're not in reverse, you're in rebuild. Every cell in your psyche is reorganizing itself around a new center. Not the ego, not the mask, but the self. And here's where the choice appears. Not as a task, but as a quiet invitation. Can you stay here long enough to let the noise die down? Can you resist the urge to fill the void with distractions, goals, or another persona? Because if you can stay, if you can hold the ache without naming it, the self will begin to rise, not with fireworks, but with a whisper. And that whisper will be enough. Stillness has a bad reputation in a world addicted to speed. The moment you stop producing, performing, or progressing, someone somewhere is ready to diagnose you with something. But what if stillness isn't a flaw in your system? It's the system updating itself. What if what you're experiencing isn't inertia, but sacred disorientation? You're not stuck. You're spinning inward, quietly, precisely, like a compass realigning beneath the floorboards of your awareness. The part of you that used to run on adrenaline and urgency has run out of fuel. And now the soul is whispering, let's not build another machine just to keep moving. Let's sit, let's listen. Let's not escape this time. Jung saw this silence for what it really is. The space between the fall of the false self and the emergence of the true one. A liminal phase, yes, but also a creative one, a dissolving that precedes creation. He warned that modernity, with its obsession for action, would always try to numb, medicate, or label this stage as regression. But he also knew that transformation doesn't arrive dressed like progress. It often looks like fatigue. It feels like doubt. It walks in wearing the clothes of disinterest and calls itself by names we're taught to fear. Burnout, failure, apathy. But what if it's none of those things? What if it's grace? Not the floating, ethereal kind, but the grounded grace of being emptied out so fully that nothing false can hide. You're being scrubbed, sanded down. Everything in you that once needed to prove, chase, perform, it's being peeled away. Not because you failed, but because you're finally being prepared to move in a way that doesn't betray who you are. The voice inside you that says, I don't care anymore. That's not apathy. It's clarity. A quiet refusal to keep pouring your life into things that don't pour back. You're not tired of life. You're tired of lies, of pretending, of repeating patterns you outgrew but couldn't escape. And now the exit is here, not as a door, but as a pause. There's no script in this space, no next step printed in bold. But you're not aimless, you're just raw. And the rawness is holy, because it doesn't allow for shortcuts. This is the space where your future self is taking shape, not with plans, but with presence. Not with performance, but with deep permission to stop doing and start becoming. The world will ask you, what are you working on? The soul will ask, what are you becoming? And sometimes the answer is quiet, just being. And that answer won't satisfy the world, but it will start to satisfy you. This stillness, this slowness, this inability to get back to it, it's not the problem, it's the path. It's what Jung referred to as a sacred descent. A moment when the ego steps aside and the unconscious begins to stir. The thoughts you used to suppress, the grief you shelved, the instincts you drowned out with noise, they all return now, not to haunt, but to help. The psyche isn't punishing you, it's liberating you, recalibrating you, letting your nervous system remember what it feels like to exist without performance, letting your breath deepen again, letting your soul speak in its first language, stillness. And if you stay here, if you don't run or numb or distract, something begins to glow beneath the ash. Not a blaze, not a breakthrough, just a soft ember, an inner warmth that says, I'm still here, and I'm not going anywhere. It's strange how quiet truth can be. You expect it to arrive with clarity, with confidence, with a booming voice that says this is the way, but it rarely does. More often it shows up like a whisper at 3 a.m., or a deep breath you didn't know you needed, or a wave of tears that come for no reason except that something inside you finally stopped resisting. This is where the old fuel dies, not with a fight, but with a fading flicker. You used to be powered by pressure, the need to matter, the need to become, and now that need is gone, or maybe not gone, just exposed. Like a mask you've worn so long it fused with your skin, and now you've peeled it off, leaving behind rawness where ambition used to be. You didn't lose your drive, you lost the illusion that drive was always yours. You're not broken, you're just no longer running on the fumes of fear. Jung understood this moment deeply. He knew that the ego could carry us only so far before it buckled under the weight of its own pretense. The ego pushes, the soul waits. And in the pause, in the gap between pushing and waiting, something begins to reassemble inside you. Something quieter, something truer. It doesn't scream for recognition, it hums for alignment. It's not asking you to go faster, it's asking you to stop sprinting in the wrong direction. And that's terrifying, because the ego knew how to function. Even in pain, even in confusion, it had a role. But now, without that familiar engine, you're floating. Not forward, not backward, just still. And in that stillness you start to feel the tension between two worlds. One is loud, efficient, constantly refreshed by algorithms and expectations. The other is ancient, slow, symbolic. The first demands output, the second waits for honesty. And here you are, between the two, wondering why your spark doesn't ignite the way it used to. But of course it doesn't. That spark was meant for survival, for fitting in, for proving something. You've outgrown it. What stirs in you now isn't spark, it's soil. Deep, quiet, living soil. The kind where roots take their time, where life doesn't perform but simply unfolds. It feels like nothing's happening, but everything's happening, in silence. Beneath the surface, beneath the skin of your old ambitions, something tender is beginning to breathe. It doesn't want applause. It doesn't want trophies. It wants truth. And truth takes time, and time takes patience. And patience feels like death when you're used to speed. This is the gray space after the storm, the day after the fire when the forest is ash but not dead. And that's where you are, not burned out, burned clean. You're not lost, you're waiting. You're letting the false fall away so the real can grow, slowly, quietly, painfully. And the pain? That's just the sound of old wiring coming undone. The ache of no longer wanting what you once chased. The hollow space where the crowd once stood, cheering for the mask you wore. But now, there is no crowd, there is no mask, just you. And a question that keeps returning: what moves me now when nothing is forcing me to move? The answer doesn't come in words, it comes in breath, in rest, in moments of stillness that feel like failure until you realize they are the first language of the soul. And the soul doesn't shout. It doesn't rush, it waits. And if you wait with it long enough, gently enough, something begins to shift. The old fire is gone, but a new flame waits. It's a strange kind of grief, isn't it? Mourning the version of you who used to run toward every task, every dream, every goal with a kind of desperate certainty. That person had energy, that person had direction, that person had a reason. But now you wake up and there's no reason. Or rather, there's no false one. And what's left is a raw, unformed version of yourself looking around at the life you once built and asking, did I ever really want this? You're not ungrateful. You're just unable to pretend. You can't fake your way into caring about things that no longer match your inner frequency. That's not apathy. That's honesty. And sometimes honesty shows up wearing the face of fatigue, because letting go of everything you once called meaningful is exhausting. Letting go of momentum is like letting go of gravity. You have to relearn how to stand. The world keeps moving. Your friends are launching things, building things, chasing things, and here you are, watching from the quiet edge, wondering if you'll ever feel like joining in again. But deep down, something in you knows that even if you could go back to the hustle, you wouldn't. Not because you're better than it, but because you're done borrowing motivation from people's expectations. This is where the discomfort sharpens. You realize you no longer care what they think, but you also haven't fully settled into what you think. So you drift in this liminal fog, feeling neither asleep nor fully awake. You've unplugged from the machine, but you haven't quite found your rhythm outside of it. And that's okay. Jung called this the nigredo, the blackening, the dissolving, the first stage of alchemical transformation. In this phase, the structure that once defined your life breaks down. The personality you spent decades perfecting begins to feel like a shell. The vision board, the metrics, the calendar, none of it sparks anything anymore. But instead of rushing to fix that, Jung invited us to stay. To stay in the dark, to stay in the unknown. Because the soul, he said, doesn't grow in clarity, it grows in chaos, in collapse, in contradiction. And what you're going through is not regression, it's reclamation. The reclaiming of a self that has no interest in performing a version of life that looks good but feels wrong. This is where a different kind of motivation starts to form. Not the kind that kicks in with a morning playlist or a double espresso, but the kind that hums from a deeper place. It's slower, subtler. It doesn't scream, get up and grind. It whispers, move when you're ready. And you find yourself doing small things, not out of pressure, but out of pull. You water the plant, not because it's on your list, but because something in you wants to care for something living. You take a walk not to hit your step count, but because the trees feel less fake than the inbox. You say no to things you would have said yes to, because the yes used to be about being liked. And now being liked costs too much. You're not doing nothing. You're doing the most radical thing a human can do. You're waiting for your life to stop being a performance. And while that waiting may look like stillness, it is not stagnation. It's preparation. And preparation, real preparation, is quiet. The self doesn't announce itself. It arrives when you've made enough room. And the making of that room is what you're doing now, even if all it looks like is you lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering when the fire will return. It will. But not the same one. This one won't burn you to stay motivated. It will warm you to stay true. So here you are, dissolving. Not disintegrating, not falling apart in some dramatic spiral, but quietly coming undone in the most necessary way. The scaffolding of who you thought you were is loosening. Your timelines don't excite you. Your goals feel foreign. The map you once clung to with both hands has become irrelevant. Not wrong, just not yours anymore. You don't feel like chasing. You don't even feel like arriving. You feel like floating. And not because you're aimless, but because you no longer believe in the destinations the old self chose. That version of you wanted certainty, control, labels. It needed to know exactly where you were going so it could feel safe. But now, safety feels like something entirely different. It feels like alignment, stillness, saying no to what you used to tolerate simply to be accepted. You don't want a ladder, you want a tree, something that grows at its own pace, something that's rooted, even if it isn't rushing. You crave realness over results, depth over direction, and that shift, that's not regression, it's evolution, a recalibration from outer validation to inner resonance. But still, you miss the momentum, or at least the illusion of momentum, the comfort of always knowing what came next. Wake up, work, achieve, collapse, repeat. You used to mistake exhaustion for purpose, but now you see it was just a loop that kept you too tired to ask the real questions. And now that the loop is broken, here come the questions. What moves me if I'm not being watched? What matters if no one applauds? Who am I when I no longer need to prove I exist? These aren't hypothetical. They rise inside you like soft waves, again and again, as you wander through this strange terrain. You're not waiting for answers. You're learning how to listen to better questions. Jung spoke of this moment as a return to the symbolic life. A life no longer lived on autopilot, but through presence, through signs, through sensations. It's not mystical, not woo-woo. It's practical in the most soulful way. You begin to notice the stories you used to tell yourself just to get through the day. You begin to question the urgency, the fear, the chase. You start recognizing them as echoes, not instructions. And so the silence continues. But it doesn't feel empty now. It feels intelligent. As if something in you is building a new rhythm, one that doesn't sync with the world's tempo but aligns with your own. You stop looking for signs outside you and start feeling for resonance inside you. Not what makes sense, but what feels true. This is when the subtle shift begins. You still don't have a 5-year plan, but you feel a pulse, a pull, not toward achievement, but toward sincerity. You find yourself craving integrity more than impact. You want to show up, not as the most impressive version of yourself, but as the most honest. Even if that honesty means saying, I don't know who I am right now, but I'm here, and I'm listening. And that is a declaration, a sacred one. It doesn't belong on a resume, but it belongs in your bones. Because from that place, the self begins to emerge. Not as a concept, not as a brand, but as a quiet authority, a steady knowing, a compass that doesn't point north but inward. You're not drifting, you're being drawn slowly, softly, into the life that fits you now. And that life won't demand performance, it will require presence. The mind wants to sprint, the soul wants to sink. And you're standing between the two, stretching across this inner contradiction like a bridge made of breath. One part of you whispers, do something, while the other urges, just be here. You feel the pull of old rhythms, the ones that once gave you a sense of identity, of usefulness, but now they feel brittle, like chasing shadows on a wall you no longer believe is real. You used to find your worth in movement. You measured progress in productivity. You drew your value from motion, action, achievement. But now, in this sacred stillness, you're learning that becoming doesn't always look like building. Sometimes it looks like unbecoming everything you thought you had to be. You don't need to be rescued. You don't need to be rebooted. You need to be remembered, gathered back together after a long time spent scattered in 1,000 directions, trying to please every version of enough you never questioned. That's what this quiet is doing. It's calling all your lost parts home. Not urgently, not with force, but with gravity. Carl Jung spoke about this stage not with fear, but with reverence. He knew that when the unconscious begins to rise, it doesn't announce itself with lightning. It begins in subtle resistance. Your body refusing to go through the motions, your mind questioning the roles it once played without hesitation. It feels like burnout, but it's really a kind of birth. Birth is messy, unpredictable, uncomfortable, but it is sacred. And what's being born in you isn't a new identity to flaunt. It's a relationship with your inner truth so deep, so unshakable, that you won't need to chase direction. You'll start to recognize direction by feel, by tone, by the resonance it creates in your chest when something is right, even if it makes no sense to the mind. You stop asking what should I do and begin asking what is quietly calling me. Not out of pressure, not out of panic, but from that calm, almost eerie place that now lives in your bones. It's the same place that used to scream at you to be better. Only now it simply says, be real. The soul has no interest in your efficiency. It's not interested in the size of your following, your productivity hacks, your weekly wins. The soul wants to incarnate. It wants to experience. Not through perfection, but through participation. It wants you to stop curating your life and start inhabiting it. This is the shift from performance to presence. And it's terrifying at first because presence isn't predictable. It doesn't come with guarantees. But it does come with peace, a kind of quiet confidence that doesn't need to be proven to exist. You start noticing how much of your former ambition was rooted in fear, of being invisible, of being unworthy, of being left behind. But now, that fear is losing its grip, slowly, tenderly. Not because it was wrong, but because you no longer need it. You're no longer building a life to be seen. You're creating a life that feels true. And sometimes that truth will lead you into silence, into solitude, into spaces where no one is watching and nothing is happening. And in those spaces, you'll find the most unexpected gift: rest. Not the kind of rest you take when you're exhausted, but the kind you give yourself because you're finally allowed to stop running. The kind that says, I can pause without losing myself. In fact, the pause is where I meet myself. You're not falling behind, you're falling inward, and that is not a detour, it's the path. There's a moment, quiet and often unnoticed, when the world's noise fades just enough for you to hear something softer, something beneath the static. It doesn't demand your attention, It doesn't promise transformation, it just waits, patiently, like a tide returning to a shore it never stopped loving. And in that moment something ancient stirs inside you. Not ambition, not urgency, something older than all of that. A kind of pull that feels more like remembering than discovering. And it doesn't push you to act, it invites you to listen, to the parts of you that don't speak in words, to the instincts that used to get drowned out by applause, to the quiet truths that live in the shadows of your breath. This is the threshold, the place Jung described not as a finish line, but a beginning. Not of a plan, but of a presence. The kind of presence that doesn't need to be mapped or monetized. It simply asks, can you be here fully, even if nothing is resolved? You're not being asked to rise, you're being asked to root, to let the new self emerge not from pressure, but from permission. Permission to no longer chase, permission to no longer pretend, permission to exist without performance. And from this deep permission, clarity is born, not quickly, not loudly, but steadily. You start seeing your life not as a series of achievements, but as a sequence of alignments. You notice when something feels off, not because you've studied the pattern, but because your body tightens. You know when something feels true, not because it checks all the boxes, but because your chest softens. This is what it means to live symbolically. To live not from strategy, but from signal. You stop shouting into the void, and you start listening to the whispers. Your dreams shift from declarations into dialogues. You stop asking, what's next, and begin asking, what's now? Not to be passive, but to be present. Because presence is where your power lives now. Not in the pace, not in the performance, in the presence. And this new presence, it doesn't hustle, it doesn't grasp. It recognizes that what's meant for you will not be missed. Because you're no longer trying to convince life to love you. You're starting to love life enough to meet it on its own terms. You stop running from discomfort and begin sitting with it like an old friend. You no longer view confusion as a failure in your thinking, but as a doorway in your soul. The questions that once terrified you begin to soften. You no longer beg for certainty, you begin to trust mystery, and in that trust you start to move again. Not because you must, but because you may. Not out of scarcity, but from sacred curiosity. You don't need every step planned. You just need the next true one. The one that hums when you touch it. The one that feels like a sigh of relief in your chest. The one that whispers, this is yours. And sometimes, what's yours won't make sense to anyone else. And that's okay, because you're not performing anymore. You're not here to be impressive, you're here to be honest. And that honesty will cost you the old life, but it will give you something no amount of success ever could. Peace. A quiet, steady peace that doesn't need proof. A soft knowing that what you are becoming has no name yet, but it's real, and it's rising. You've made it this far, not by sprinting, but by staying. Not by figuring everything out, but by letting go of the need to. And now something soft begins to settle. Not an answer, not a breakthrough, just a deeper breath. The kind that doesn't reach your lungs, it reaches your life. You no longer need the fire of the past. You no longer crave the praise, the plan, the polished persona. What you crave now is quiet, but not the silence of avoidance. The silence of returning to yourself, to the rhythm that was drowned out by ambition, to the voice that once whispered in childhood and then went quiet under the weight of being an adult who had to prove something. And now you see, that proving was never the point. That chasing was never the destination. You were never meant to run toward a version of yourself that fit inside someone else's expectations. You were meant to unbecome, unlearn, unravel so that what's left is what was always true. Not the image, but the essence. Jung called it the symbolic life. A life not built on the scaffolding of shoulds and should-haves, but lived through meaning, felt through intuition, guided by something deeper than logic, softer than strategy. A life where you respond instead of react, where you move from resonance, not from rules. And what that looks like isn't always dramatic. Often, it's beautifully ordinary. You say no when you used to say yes. You take the long way home. You rest when no one's watching. You create without asking if it's good enough. You feel without editing. You exist without explaining. You begin to notice beauty again. Not curated beauty, but the kind that lives in chipped mugs and slow mornings and conversations where you finally say what you mean. You don't need to be bold. You just need to be here. fully, honestly, gently. You're not building a legacy. You're building a life that fits your breath, a life that doesn't drain you to maintain, a life that welcomes your whole self, not just the parts that are easy to love. And from this life, this quiet, undramatic, soul-led life, things begin to bloom. Not fast, not loud, but real. The motivation you thought you lost was never yours to keep. It belonged to the performance, the grind, the mask. What rises now is not motivation, but meaning. Not force, but flow. Not pressure, but presence. And that's enough. You've been through the unraveling. You've stood still in the fog. You've sat quietly while others sped past. And now, something inside you moves. Not with urgency, not with fear, but with the gentle momentum of becoming. So if you're still wandering through the stillness, unsure of who you're becoming, know this. Your presence is not a pause. It's a passage. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are blooming, quietly, slowly, inwardly. And what will emerge from you will not be a return. It will be a beginning. And now, as you lie here in the quiet of this moment, let yourself sink just a little deeper into your own breath. Let the weight of everything you thought you had to be melt into the mattress beneath you. There is no race, no noise, no role left to perform tonight. You are not late. You are not lost. You are exactly where your becoming begins. The questions can wait. The answers will come in their time. What matters now is your rest, your willingness to let the world spin without you for a while, to allow your body to soften, your mind to slow, and your soul to speak, softly, slowly, gently. Let yourself drift, not because you've given up, but because you're finally being held. Let the stillness wrap around you like a familiar blanket. Let the hush of this moment remind you that transformation does not shout, it whispers. And the fact that you are here, breathing, listening, surrendering, that is enough. So rest now, not to escape life, but to return to it, from a place that's quieter, deeper, truer. Sleep well, gentle soul.